I recently went to the 2022 Kansas Silent Film Festival and really had a great time there. It was my first time ever, even though they've had this for 25 years. Let me tell you what this festival is all about. I'm going to ask you for your ideas of what festivals around the world to go to, what's fun to go to. Let us know in the comments. But let me tell you about this silent film festival, why I think it's worth going to or thinking about going to such a festival. I took a drive down to Topeka, Kansas, the capital of Kansas. Never had been in Kansas before in my life and had to endure driving through a bit of a snowstorm, although this snowstorm was not as bad as it looks because the snow and the ice was not sticking to anything. After a few hours drive there, I arrived. Never been to Topeka before. It's a decent place to be, but Washburn University really is quite nice, and that was one of the central locations of the Silent Film Festival. They really had 3 days of movies, all silent movies before the sound era, and all of these movies, each one of them, 25 of them, had live music, whether it's piano, organ, or a 5-piece orchestra, the Mont Alto Motion Picture Orchestra, which you might actually know from a variety of Blu-rays. They record a number of compositions and have been on actual discs that you can listen to. A bunch of reasons to go. You'll see these movies on the big screen. You have the live accompaniment, which simulates what it would have been like to watch these movies as they were in 19-teens and 20s. Also, you get a variety of films, and they're not just feature films. There were 6 or 7 features, but also a number of shorts. And typically what they did at the festival was show 2 to 3 short films, say 10 to 15 to 20 minutes long, and then show a feature film typically 70 to 90 minutes long. That made for a lot of viewing, and while I didn't go to everything, the things I didn't go to were quite interesting. They synced up well. You're focusing on a particular period of time, the 19-teens and 20s in movie making, the early days obviously. Most of the movies were Hollywood era, and you actually get a lot of American themes, and you can kind of capture, understand the zeitgeist, the beliefs and values of this time period by watching a number of movies in a short span, and that's exactly what happened here. First night they showed Steamboat Bill Jr. by Buster Keaton. Now this is a movie I hadn't appreciated much before. I'd seen it 2 to 3 times before, and only in the privacy of my own home with a disc. But here you had big screen, the live Mont Alto Orchestra was playing, and a number of people were there who really like silent movies, and that totally helped me. I finally understood, to some extent, Steamboat Bill Jr., its appeal, why people really like it, beyond just a couple funny scenes or really interesting shots, special effects shots. It's quite well done, and Buster Keaton obviously is a total great. He's a genius, especially just as an actor, as a comic actor. So I think this experience really helped me quite a bit. That's why I recommend going to a live festival like this with live music. They also had in a large Episcopal cathedral a screening of a couple of feature films, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which I'd seen before live with live music. And then they also had Tell It to the Marines. Both movies star Lon Chaney, a star you would know, the man of 1,000 faces, so-called. Although Tell It to the Marines was interesting, sort of a propaganda picture, I would say, where Lon Chaney plays a Marine. And what I really thought was fascinating about Tell It to the Marines, I almost have no doubt about it that Stanley Kubrick had watched it and then sort of reworked it in Full Metal Jacket as a complete response to Tell It to the Marines, which was a famous movie in the 1920s, or in the year it came out, was second at the box office. Full Metal Jacket pairs really interesting with it, almost the opposite kind of story. So my prior movie knowledge helped me understand this 1920s movie, which I probably wouldn't have liked otherwise. On the Saturday of the festival, they showed the first Peter Pan feature ever, interestingly starring a woman as Peter Pan, with some strange and interesting special effects. And I find that quite fascinating because only 20 years or so after the novel by J.M. Barrie was written, so it's pretty fresh, the story of Peter Pan. I was totally fascinated by the live music accompaniment. I saw, for example, Ben Modell, a pianist, and he was up there with no music and no lights on the piano. And I asked him, did you memorize the piece? Did you play a memorized piece? He said, no, I was improvising over a movie I had not watched before. Now, that just level of skill stuns me, to be able to play along at the right tempo, have the right sort of sounds when you need to have them, if characters falling down or if some wild change in tone happens. You as the musician have to be able to adapt to that and play maybe stock phrases or something like that while the movie is shifting tones. So I found that absolutely fascinating. Now, most of the time these live musicians did have sheet music. However, how do they know how to play the right tempos and how and when to do certain effects? They know how to do it. They're very well trained, and it's absolutely fascinating that people are still interested in this craft. Regarding my other observations, I believe that movie makers today, and even video makers, are missing out on a number of things that the silent movie makers knew well, particularly with comedy. And I will say in the comedies, there were a number of sight gags because they didn't have sound to do gags with or to inject humor with. They only had sight, and they were very flashy, moving around quite a bit. Obviously, that results in a lot of hitting, kicking, slapping, falling down, slapstick kind of stuff. But all of these shorts that I watched had a number of sight gags that I thought, that's missing from modern movies. It's been totally abandoned almost, as the ability to craft an excellent sight gag. Now, I think Pixar and other kids' movies or family movies know this. You know, with a movie like WALL-E, which is almost always a silent movie anyway, copying Lloyd and Chaplin and Keaton, it's doing pretty good work with the sort of sight gags I'm telling you about. But otherwise, I think we're lacking that very thing. All in all, I had a good time at this festival. I thought it was very helpful to me as a teacher, someone interested in early 20th century America's culture at that time, someone interested in movie history. All of those reasons were reasons for me to go. Was I wildly entertained by these? Not so much. A couple of them did wildly entertain me, or I thought were really, really fun to watch. A lot of times these movies were a bit of a chore, so I wouldn't recommend most of them for the sake of mere entertainment. But there's all kinds of other reasons, philosophical, historical, and so on, to watch these and to get a sense of how people watched back then, how they made movies. And I'm telling you, video makers, you can get inspired by what these people were doing back then, especially I think the comedians, as well as the musicianship that can be presented by silent movie composers and musicians. So for all those reasons, I would recommend a festival like this if it's available to you. Now, I'm curious to know what festivals in this country, the United States, and elsewhere you recommend going to and why. Would you please put those in the comments? I would love to consider going to anything that I thought was really interesting, even if it's a long distance from me. So please, one reason I'm telling you about the Kansas Silent Film Festival, by the way, is 2 years ago, a person commented on my channel that I could go to this, that it was available, and I looked it up and realized I could go to it. It's actually pretty close to me. So I'm interested in other things I don't know about. What festivals, then, have you been to or are you aware of, and would you recommend going to? Let us know in the comments. Please subscribe to this channel for more great content. Thank you. Have a great day.